Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about interview questions that are really hard. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, when you're interviewing a candidate, would you ask if the candidate has already seen or practiced the code problem before if they are able to solve a hard coding problem within a few minutes without asking any questions? Well, if I see them solving it like in a few minutes without asking any questions, and I for some reason given them a completely standard problem, I just assume that they have already solved it some other fashion. But I would not, like, why would you give a candidate a completely standard problem and then hope and like just sort of hope that they haven't solved it? I've actually done this a few times myself. I've been like tested with things that it's a completely standard problem. It's like you can literally go and get the source code for the solution, just copy paste it into the thing. I even remember this one company that had like a bunch of JavaScript questions about, here is a piece of code. What does it do? What does it output when you're done? And I kind of just opened up my console, like copy pasted it, ran it in the browser, and posted the answer. Congratulations, you now have verified that I know how to code. So for me, when I have this sort of thing, I usually don't leave my assessment of if somebody knows how to program well to solely the coding thing. So the thing about the code challenge, which I think is very useful, is that it will give you at the very least an indication of how well does a person know how to code. That's the thing it's going to give you. So if a person knows how to solve my coding problem or whatever like they're doing in a very short amount of time, and I use a standard one, that's not really a test that I would give someone to figure out if they're good or bad at software development. It is a test that I would give in order to just figure out, do they know how to solve any type of problem in programming. It's I usually, depending on the sort of process you have, I have one step that I always think is kind of underestimated for a lot of companies, which is actually one of the things that Google is doing, which I think is fairly, in a sense, it is a nice way of doing it, which is to give a standard computer science-y type of problem up front to the candidate, because there's a lot of candidates who are they're not actually very gifted as software developers, and if you give someone a completely standard problem that they could literally Google for and they still can't fix it or like actually implement it, why would you talk to that person? Then they even lack like the basic knowledge of going and like solving like a standard issue. Who knows how they're going to solve CSS problems? So but as I said, the focus isn't to try to fail them or like try to figure out if they're good or bad. It's just, can you write basic software? Do you understand how to fix your own like Google for a problem or something like that, right? And then the way that I truly try to figure out how well someone knows something is twofold. One is to give them a realistic coding problem that is actually relevant to the role that I'm looking for, and then of course I, as the interviewer, I have to know what their job is actually going to be, so I can figure out, here is a simple version of something they might do in the workplace, right? How do they solve this problem? And then just kind of look, because usually if it's a decent software developer, they will all pretty much solve the problem in a similar sort of fashion. And if there's something extreme about it, which happens, that's usually a red flag. You can't really for certain say why someone makes the choices that they make without talking to them, which is another thing you should always try to do if you can. Even if the code the only time I fail a code test is usually if the thing that they make is like obviously broken to the point where it wouldn't even pass the most drunk QA in the world. If that's the case, then no, I don't see any reason why we should talk. But if it's sort of correct and like it sort of does what it's supposed to do, and I see that they sort of figured out how to do this without like a lot of issues, if it's something that I would probably on a bad day let go in a code review or something like that, if we're doing it for real in production, then yes, let's have a talk. Because the thing that usually is, in my opinion, the best way to figure out if someone actually knows their stuff is to ask them to explain how they thought about it. That's the thing. So if nobody asks any questions, if let's say in this fictive interview, if I sit with the interview candidate, or like the candidate, and they just solve the problem in a few minutes, and then I ask them, how did you solve it? If they can explain why and how, and I will of course have follow-up questions. I will ask them about, okay, but why did you go that way and not that way? And I will keep asking questions until I am satisfied that they have a solid understanding of what they just did. A person who only practiced the problem will not be able to make me convinced that they truly understand it, because it takes a long time and a lot of reflection and a lot of overall skill to be able to solve one of these sort of like computer science sorts of problems and give a really good holistic answer to this, to not just to explain what the problem is, but also understand why it can be solved in this way or that way, etc., etc. That is a very tough question to answer when somebody asks you about it. It's sort of like I like to tell, if you've ever done mathematics back in school, your teacher, I used to do this. I did the math in my head, and then I just wrote the answer. And my teacher would always scold me for that and say, well, now you took the easy route, because I don't know if you understand how you got that answer there. I just know that you got the answer right. And that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking to figure out if you understand math. And that, my friend, you can't prove by just writing the answer. It's the same thing here. You cannot prove to me that you're good at software development if you just have the answer in when it comes to like these sorts of standard questions. And that's why asking how did you solve it and asking a few follow-up questions is much more interesting to me. I would never just say yes, you passed because they got the answer right. That would be very silly of me. So, what I want you to take away from this is that, well, no, I would not try to ask if they've done this, like maybe in passing, but not like a serious answer. Because if you solve like a super hard coding problem that is standard without asking any questions, and like it takes just a few minutes, I just assume that you have already checked this. And then the real question starts, which is, okay, could you explain how you solved it? Walk me through your code and explain the problem that we're solving. What do you know about it, etc., etc., because it's a standard coding problem. And usually I prefer to have that conversation with the candidate than anything else, because that tells me more about the candidate than anything that they could express through code. It's actually very difficult to figure out if a candidate is good or bad by just the coding into code itself, because the problem with that is that it's hard for you as a candidate to know what to add to a coding test. Should you add unit tests? Should you not add unit tests? Should you add a lot of comments? Should you not add comments? Should you go this way, that way? It's in some cases I've seen guys, and I've done this myself, guys. I've made all the mistakes in the book. Everything from trying to impress people with my coding test to trying to not try too hard, to like all these sorts of like showing off with different techniques and like actually making the code worse because I want to prove myself in my coding test, things like that. So it's really tricky as someone who's reviewing a candidate's interview coding test to figure out how good they are. So that's why I tell people that the personal interview is probably the place where you're going to figure out if they actually know their stuff. The code test is necessary just to screen people so that you don't have to talk to every single person. It's just to kind of filter out the people who seem to know what they're doing, and then the conversation is going to give you the rest usually. Have a great day.